With Visual Studio 2022 already in preview, there are still a couple of things in Visual Studio 2019 that tend to fly under the radar, especially for beginners. Even though it doesn't have as many customization options as VScode, nor is it updated as much, Visual Studio still holds its own in more ways than one. Hi, I'm Victor, and today on Height Above Sea Level, we'll be looking at 5 sneaky Visual Studio tips and tricks. This first one is a bit obvious, but it took me quite a while to figure out, and that's enabling word wrap. Tired of your lines of code always extending to the right side of the screen? Then word wrap's here to help. Enabling word wrap makes it so that whenever the cursor reaches the end of your viewport, in other words the area you can type in, it automatically jumps to the next line. It's always good practice not to write too many long lines of code, but for those instances where the screen is too small or your comments are too long, word wrap is your best friend. So far, I've only been able to enable this when coding in C#. I haven't seen the option to enable it when working with HTML or CSS, so if you know how to do it, let me know in the comments. This option can also be enabled in VS Code using Alt+Z, as long as you haven't changed the default shortcut. Alternatively, you can manually enable it by going to View up top and selecting Word Wrap. The VS Code Word Wrap option works for all programming languages. Next up is changing method colors. Like I mentioned before, Visual Studio doesn't have that many options when it comes to themes. If you're someone who prefers using VS Code but switches over to the Visual Studio IDE, then the UI can look a bit bland. Some of those old themes won't transfer over, but there are ways to customize things to your liking. Over under Tools, select Options. First off, you can change the theme from dark mode to light mode and vice versa under General. Once satisfied, select Fonts and Colors from the list on the left under Environment. From here, you can change the colors of methods, comments, strings, and many other options as you see fit. You can define these colors as per the programming language you're using like C++, C#, or even HTML and CSS. Just play around with them until you find what works for you. Moving on is using IntelliSense. IntelliSense support is much better in Visual Studio IDE than VS Code in my opinion, but there are times when it doesn't work as well as you'd want it to. If, for whatever reason, it goes away after you declare a method whose parameters you want to see, delete the opening bracket and type it again. This brings it back, allowing you to browse through the other overloads the method may have had. Alternatively, you could be using a method that takes in multiple arguments but just want to know what a particular argument is. In such situations, delete the comma before the argument and type it again. IntelliSense will automatically show you the overload of the method you're using and what the type of the current argument you're passing should be. If words like IntelliSense and overload sound a bit confusing to you, I have a video explaining programming words you can check out. Up next is a quick way to check the type of what's returned after assigning it to a variable. Sometimes, when chaining method calls together, you tend to lose track of what the type of the value that's returned will be. A good example is when using link extension methods. Link is quite useful when writing C# code, but can get a bit complex the more you use it. It includes a method called select that can return a different type from the variable it's initially used in. To check the final return type, hover over the var keyword and this should show you everything you need to know, including what namespace the return type belongs to. Using the var keyword is optional, but I do believe it makes the code much cleaner and easier to read. It also makes things seem less repetitive. If you're someone who likes to add the return type manually rather than let the compiler figure it out, well and good. This step won't do much for you, but if you ever feel the need to use var, then this is something worth keeping in mind. Finally, at number 5 is data tips. Data tips are a convenient way to view information about a variable while debugging. One thing to note is that data tips only work in break mode and with variables that are currently in scope. You'll first have to be in debug mode to make use of data tips, so go ahead and press F5 to start the debugger. Just like before, hover over the variable and the data tip will appear. You can pin this and drag it to wherever you want. You can also add any comments to the pinned data tip if you want. Another cool thing about data tips is you can expand the variable and examine its elements. The same can also be done with pinned variables. If you want to get even more specific, you can pin individual properties of the variables being inspected. This is especially helpful when working with lists containing objects with multiple parameters, but you're only interested in maybe 1 or 2. A quick bonus before we wrap things up is dummy text. You probably already know by now that if you type lorem and press tab, you automatically get some dummy text. However, if you want to control how many words are in this piece of dummy text, type lorem followed by a number, and the text that appears will have the same number of words as the number you specified. That's all I had for you guys. Are there any other sneaky tips I missed that you'd love to share? Let me know in the comments below. Also, be sure to subscribe and like the video if you found it helpful. It really helps out. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, from me to you, deuces.